Part two of a wonderful conversation with my man, John Garcia. Let's do it.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Part two of my conversation with John Garcia. Really quick, John comes on all of our shows, the different Locked On college shows, and he provides wonderful recruitment information and school-specific information to the school-specific fan bases. And obviously, John is really smart. But one thing we've never had the opportunity to do is just to come on here and just chop it up about college football. And so that's what we're about to do. We're about to just chop it up about college football this season with the director of football recruiting at Sports Illustrated, John Garcia, because we're super excited for the season. John, do you know how far we are away from the season at this point now?
I don't have the daily countdown, but I think we're in the 80s, right? I think we're getting a little bit closer. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's do it. My first question for you is, who is the best team in your eyes in college football heading into the 2022 season?
Man, right out of the gate, you're getting me. I'd probably go Alabama. I know it's chalk, but man, it's, there's not a lot of teams, first of all, that have that combination of head coach, OC, DC, and quarterback coming back, that kind of diamond in my brain. That's usually a predicator for at least a lot of success, 10 plus wins. You're going to be in it for your conference crown and all of that. And Bama's got all that coming back. So I do think, especially losing in the Natty, which Saban usually comes back the next year and wins it when he does, I do think that all the motivating factors and the physical factors will be there for Alabama. And their defense could be the best in the country this year on top of that. I think they've got the best pass rusher in Will Anderson, the best pass rush combo with Dallas Turner there as well. The secondary should be really good. And again, they hit the portal at the right spots, man. They brought in a bunch of impact players across the board. I think Jahmyr Gibbs at running back is going to be a superstar. Eli Ricks could be the first cornerback off the board in the draft. He was brought in from LSU of all places. So they're always loaded. But this defense in particular will be great. And Bryce Young and that crew is back. So if some receiving threats step up, I think they're not going to miss a beat offensively either. And they're going to be able to really challenge everyone to get back over to the playoff. And obviously you get in there and it's anyone's game.
So what you're telling me is that on September 10th, the Longhorns might be in trouble.
I didn't want to say it. It's just, it's one of those things where, it's, Bama fans, they call it, I used to live there, they call it a revenge tour. Anytime they don't win it all, the next year is the revenge tour. So it just happens to line up with Texas on the schedule. I saw the game is sold out now, and no surprise there. But yeah, I just think it's a lot of firepower. Although I'll say this Texas offense is going to score a ton of points this year. I mean, there's really no other way to put it. I do think that's a lot of pressure on whoever the quarterback is that day, because you got the best pass rushers in America coming after you. But the pass catchers Texas has, everyone's going to struggle with them. And then you've got maybe the best running back in the country as well. So it could be a fun shootout kind of game, although it won't be fun for Texas fans or Bama fans. But for the rest of us, it'll be really fun to watch and entertaining to watch. But yeah, it's hard to predict a loss for Alabama looking at their schedule really anywhere, especially again when you lost in such a big way in that national title game.
Yeah, I hope it's a shootout, because the betting site sure don't think so with that 14 plus point spread. So if it's a shootout, I think Texas fans might be a little bit happy. And as a Texas fan, you would like that game not to be the second week of the season, especially when you don't know who your starter is. You would like for it to be later on in the season, because I think this is a Texas team that's going to get better each week, and so you would like for that to, be later in the season. But September 10th, we're going to be ready. You know what I'm saying? But Alabama, like you said, it's chalk, but it's chalk for a reason, right? If they have the best offensive player in the country in Bryce Young and have the best defensive player in the country in, Will Anderson, arguably the best coach in college football of all time, and Nick Saban, then they're rightfully so at the number one spot. But let's get away from the chalk. And who is your dark horse college football playoff and potentially championship contender?
I got to go. If we're going dark horse, it can't be, Bama or Georgia in the SEC. It can't be Ohio State in the Big Ten, although I do think they'll bounce back. It can't be teams that have been there recently, right? Man, it would be a heck of a story if USC could pull it off, man. I do think that the Pac-12 with Oregon changing coaching staffs, especially, could be wide open. Offensively, they're going to feel like Texas, right? A ton of weapons. There is question marks on the offensive line, just like Texas, and on the defense, just like Texas. But, man, USC is going to score points. We know that. Caleb Williams is going to lead that show. He got them out of a ton of situations last year at Oklahoma. And I just think that familiarity within that offense going into year two, and really for him, the first year in 3 years for him where he knows I'm the guy day one. He missed his senior year of high school because of the pandemic. 2021, he was, he thought he was better than Spencer Rattler, but he had to wait his turn to show it. So this is the first time in 3 years where he knows, and he had the control of, I'm going to go somewhere where I'm going to be the guy. And he still chose to follow Lincoln Riley out to USC. So it's a lot of pressure, but that kid, it seems built for it to a degree. So if we're saying dark horse now, I don't want like somebody to pull this and write a crappy blog story like, oh, John Garcia is predicting USC in the playoff. But with their conference and the turnover with the king of that conference lately in Oregon changing coaching staffs, I think that there is something there for the taking in the Pac-12. And I think USC offensively will have so much firepower. And in this day and age, you don't have to have the best defense to make that kind of run. So if we're going dark horse, give me Lincoln Riley and the Trojans, which is weird to say still.
So that makes so much sense. I kind of knew you were going to say that because that's like the right answer, right? Like when you think of it, like you said, the Pac-12, and you think about like how easily, because first of all, I just say you can rebuild a college football team so fast. So when people are talking about like, oh, what Texas did last year and what USC did last year, you can change the complexion of a team in the offseason in college football with the transfer portal and recruiting. But like you said, the Pac-12, I mean, I think they should win the Pac-12 this year. I mean, and I think you feel that way too. And if they can get through the Pac-12 and get through that schedule with one loss, the allure of USC, the Lincoln Riley, narrative storyline, the Caleb Williams narrative storyline, I think college football would be more than happy to put them in the top four. So I think if a lot of people would have USC as that dark horse, team that can end up in the top four at the end of the season. I think that's a great pick, and I definitely agree with you on a dark horse, championship contender. And then once you're in the top four, all you have to do is, win 2 games, and Lightning can strike at any point. All right, so when we look at the top of the Heisman rankings, right, the best player in college football, you see names up there, like Bryce Young, of course, C.J. Stroud, of course. And then you have some, other players, like a Caleb Williams, of course, what we saw him do and him being in the offense in USC. But then you see some players like Bijan Robinson and then Quinn Ewers, who, has been taking a stab. He's up there in the top 5 and top 6 and some of that. So who is your like dark horse Heisman contender? Or like who is the player that you think could compete for a Heisman at the end of the year that maybe we're not thinking of right now, or just isn't at like the top? I mean, because your dark horse could be 8th in the Heisman rankings, right? But it's just a player that we're not thinking of off the top of our head that's saying he has a legitimate chance to win the Heisman this year in college football.
Yeah, I think it's easy to go QB here, so I'll veer off towards the running back position. I love Bijan, I really do, but man, I'm going Trevion Henderson at Ohio State, as I think we talk about a revenge tour. Ohio State's probably about to go on a revenge tour of their own with C.J. Stroud, who will be their Heisman type guy. But I just think if Ohio State's going to be sustainable long term, and last year taught us this, they got to emphasize the run game a little bit more. And Henderson, from a talent perspective, is as talented as any back that there is in this country right now. So I do think Ohio State bounces back and becomes the favorite to win the Big Ten again. I think that conference is loaded. It might be the most difficult conference to navigate. But if Ohio State is going to get back up there, which is kind of, a little bit of an important factor for Heisman contenders, I think that we know about Stroud. We know about the receivers. I think Henderson's got to step up and kind of be that guy. So I could see him being this huge big play threat for the Buckeyes because everybody's going to be softened up with what they present offensively, that I think he could just have big running lanes, particularly early in the season. And if you remember last year, there really wasn't that no-brainer Heisman guy early on. It was very much up in the air. It was like Matt Corral at the beginning of the season. So I think that, that's going to shift a bunch early this year. So if it's a non-quarterback that does it, it's got to either be Bijan Robinson against Alabama. That could be kind of the beginning of his real Heisman run. But I just don't know, long-term winning-wise, if Texas right out of the gate is going to be a 10-win type team this fall. I think the Big 12 is better than people realize, especially on defense, which is something we never talk about enough. But I do think Ohio State in the Big 10 has the opportunity to score a ton of points, and Trevion can flash and splash along the way as a running back. So I'll go with him.
And if you were, I'll piggyback off of you +1 you. If you're talking about non-quarterbacks winning the award, we could stay in Columbus and talk about Jackson Smith and Jigba.
That's
true.
If
we're looking at what Devontae Smith did, because my God, Jackson Smith and Jigba is a dog. I mean, if he goes out there and puts up 1,900 yards and 20 touchdowns, and they have the revenge tour type of season you're talking about, he could get some Heisman consideration as well. So really good pick there. And, like I said, I'll just +1 you and add in Jackson Smith and Jigba to two players that definitely at the end of the season we could be looking at as Heisman contenders. You mentioned the Big 12, and we know how close the Big 12 is potentially going to be this year. And you talked about the Big 12 being a lot better than a lot of people think. So I'm going to put you on the spot here. I'm going to put you in the fire, feet to the fire. Who wins the Big 12 this year, in your opinion, and why? And you don't have to. I know we're on Locked On Longhorns. You know what I'm saying. You don't have to say Texas. If you know what I mean. We'll go out there and prove it on the field. You know what I'm saying. So who do you think is going to win the Big 12 this year, and why?
I'll just talk it out as we go through. I mean, it's really only a few schools that are contenders for me, right? Obviously, last year's participants have to be in the conversation. Baylor and Okie State. I think Okie State's defense will be really good. Spencer Sanders is back for like his 43rd year in Stillwater. So I do think offensively they'll be steady, but I don't know how explosive they're going to be. I do think Baylor takes a step back on defense, but maybe offensively they throw the ball and play a little bit more balanced. So I think both of those programs will be very good. Oklahoma's the wild card, obviously, entirely new coaching staff. I do think the Jeff Lebby, Dylan Gabriel combination is rock solid. They obviously have worked together in the past. There's still a lot of weapons out in Norman, but I do think it'll take time. So I think they could catch some L's early on in their schedule. And I actually think Texas is going to, beyond Alabama, because we're talking Big 12 title, so obviously those conference games matter the most. If they can figure out QB, which it's going to be yours, right? I mean, we can kind of start to say that. I really think Texas can come out of this thing because their receiver core is probably the best in the country. They've got arguably the best running back in the country, and they've got the quarterback with maybe the strongest arm in the country, if it is yours. So you take your lumps against Alabama, and then you start to churn from there and build. And you do it without the expectations, which is, I think, always the thing that crushes Texas is these crazy expectations, and then boom, something happens. So catch your deflation early against Bama, maybe contend and lose late, and then you slowly build underneath that. And I actually think Texas is going to win the Big 12 this year. I don't see an offense that can compete with Texas's. Now, defensively, I do still want to see more. Let me make that clear. But I think offensively, if Quinn Ewers can figure it out, and I think he can, having, covered him as a recruit, he got the free redshirt year, whatever we want to call it, at Ohio State, which, by the way, knows what they're doing with quarterbacks too. I think that there's a motivation there for him to figure it out and play explosive football. So I got Texas in the Big 12. There's a lot of great defenses, but there's one offense that's going to be overwhelming to me, and that's the one in Austin.
Y'all just heard John Garcia say that Texas is going to win the Big 12. For all the non-Longhorn fans that keep finding my content and keep calling me crazy for saying the same thing, I know y'all read, listen to, and watch Sports Illustrated, and John Garcia just said the same thing. Clearly, I'm a little bit smarter than y'all want to give me credit for. And for Longhorn Nation, I've been telling y'all since January 31st, the first day I did this podcast, this Texas team is different. They're going to win the Big 12. I know y'all tired of hearing my voice. John Garcia, Director of Football Recruiting at Sports Illustrated, just said it, just saying. Let me read this word from our sponsors real quick so they don't replace me on this show. You know how our friends at Built are always coming out with amazing new flavors. Well, this time, Built Bar has truly outdone themselves with their new mud pie flavor. And for the first time ever, Built is introducing the new mud pie flavor in both mud pie bar and mud pie puffs. I have some in the fridge right now. They are amazing. Chocolate mousse, whipped cream, cookies and cream crumble. Stop drooling. Get to Built.com right now to order your box of mud pie bars and puffs. You will not regret it. Go to Built.com, use promo code LOCK15 and get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at Built.com. All right, John. A lot of great games in college football. I was on a podcast, the Over the Hill podcast based in London, and I was telling them, they're trying to get more excitement about college football. I was telling them, October 8th is the day that you need to be watching college football. You got Texas and Oklahoma. But that night, we got Jimbo and Nick Saban. We got Texas A&M and Alabama. But that's just one day. A lot of great matchups throughout the season in college football. The matchup you're most excited to watch this year is?
Oh, man. You just hit me over the top with these.
My bad.
Oh, goodness. I wouldn't have said this 2 weeks ago, but I got a phone call the other day from a good friend of mine who knows his stuff, a good, well-sourced person. I don't want to give their job away.
Yes, sir.
And he said, I got something for you. Oregon's going to knock off Georgia right out of the gate with their old defensive coordinator. And I was like, man, there is no way. And then we got to talking about it, right? Georgia's defense, historical last year, mostly gone, right? So Oregon presenting something brand new that you really can't game plan for, right? I mean, Kenny Dillingham's, coached offenses at different parts of the country, Auburn, Florida State, et cetera. But with this personnel and all that, still largely unknown what they're going to present. And obviously, Dan Lanning comes to Oregon with a true knowledge, literally, of pretty much everything that Georgia does. Now, I'm not calling that shot, but talking to this person and then kind of talking it out and thinking about it, I'm like, oh my gosh, I could see this happening, right? I mean, that roster last year, which was less talented than they'll be this year, went into Columbus and won, right? And it would be hard-pressed to think that anything like that could happen again. But neutral site, different Georgia team, and an Oregon team that has a lot to prove with a lot of young coaches that are really aggressive in an offense that should be just as aggressive against one of the few guys who's played against that great Georgia defense in Bo Nix at quarterback. I think he's a sleeper. I think Oregon's a sleeper because of that. And I think that becomes the most entertaining game I want to watch on the field. Off the field, you said it. Give me Bama, Texas A&M. I don't know what the spread will be, but I'll probably take Bama laying whatever points they roll out there, because Saban usually doesn't do the personal thing, but I think he will that night. There's a lot of great matchups this year, but give me that one. Give me Oregon and Georgia, and that's another spread that I might call some friends on, because that one could be quite interesting, because Georgia's going to be favored by a lot. It's just a matter of how much. So that's a sneaky game that I haven't heard enough discussion about, because both of those teams are so different, and there's some X factors there that actually lean towards Oregon's way. So the SEC fans will be coming for me soon, but it's all good. We're built for it.
Bro, that is an amazing answer, because that's a game, like you said, I wasn't even thinking about. Like, that game's not even on my radar. And you just made points that I'm like, bro, you're right. Like, I'm not saying Oregon, like, neither one of us is saying Oregon is going to beat Georgia, for the people that, try to take what they want to take. Neither one of us is saying that.
Correct.
But you're saying that Oregon has way more of a chance than most people think, and that's going to be a way more interesting game than most people think. And now I'm locked into that game. Like, now I want to see Oregon, Georgia, bro. That is an amazing answer, an amazing point.
I
This is
appreciate
why we
it.
bring you on, man. This is why we got you with Locked On. This is why you the director of football recruiting at Sports Illustrated, bro. Man,
I did predict the most correct games last year at SI. I will say that because I haven't been able to brag about that.
Yeah.
So let me brag about that.
Talk that. Let them know.
At least
Let them know.
audibly,
Keep
I
us.
won.
You already got that credibility, but just keep establishing it. Yeah, this is who we got on Locked On Longhorns.
Yeah,
The
look,
smartest
hey,
man at Sports Illustrated. That was
to,
subjective.
co-
I
to
said
cover
that. You know.
to cover college football recruiting, you got to watch the game and you got to cover college the same way. So we get the advantage because we know about these new players a little bit more than the folks who just stick to college football themselves. But look, Georgia's going to be loaded, right? Super talented.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, you talk about a chip on his shoulder. Bo Nick's got a boulder on his shoulder, and he's going to an OC he's already worked with, just like Dylan Gabriel is. And I think they're going to do some things in the Pac-12. I think it's going to be them and USC all over again. But that Oregon angle is more interesting than I would have thought a few months ago.
Yeah, I'm really excited for that game. That's a great answer. And if Oregon somehow wins that game, you don't know how fast I'm gonna come back and cut this clip. You know what I'm saying? So we'll
Please
see.
do
All
it.
right.
Please do it. Please tag me in that one.
Yeah, we definitely will. Both accounts. All right. So it talked about recruiting and college football recruiting and you just being locked into that. Such a big part of college football now is the transfer portal, and we've seen a lot of movement. And you talked about some transfers earlier going to Alabama. Obviously, we've seen recently Jordan Addison going to USC. We talked about how you can change. Really, USC bringing in almost everybody from the transfer portal, right? Like we've seen it with Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss. Like you can do so much in the transfer portal and really change your team. I mean, here on Locked On Longhorns, Quinn Ewers, right? I mean, that's even if you just brought him in, I mean, that's a transfer class in itself. But then you talk about Agiye Hall, Jaleel Billingsley, Ryan Watts, all of that, right? Who will be the most impactful transfer in college football this year, in your opinion, or maybe one of the most impactful transfers?
I love these, man. You brought the thunder today. I love it. I probably got to go quarterback by default here, I would imagine. So if I'm picking USC to be my dark horse, title team, I got to go Caleb Williams. I think that he was kind of the galvanizing force with the back end of the transfer run that USC went on. And you mentioned the groups that did the best in the portal. It was certainly Texas, USC, Ole Miss, I would say at the very top. And I think you can almost point to a certain player or a certain time where you said, okay, just as folks like you and me who do this every day, you're like, they're going to get a million transfers. Like you just know it's coming. And for once Caleb finally, because remember, that was a long drawn out process. Once he pulled the trigger, I think that was really kind of the end of it. Like, hey, USC was going to go crazy with the offensive additions in particular. And I think that's what we saw. And I think he's going to have maybe the most pressure, not after Quinn Ewers, because Quinn's going to have the most pressure of all these guys. I think Caleb will have the second most pressure. But the difference is we've seen it. We've seen him live up to some of that already. Now he'll be in new colors, but I do think he'll be in a conference that's the door's wide open, man. And no disrespect to Kyle Whittingham in Utah, who I love their style and their consistency, but that door is wide open for USC to reclaim everything that perception tells us they're supposed to be in that conference. So I think if that's the case, then Caleb Williams has to be the most impactful transfer quarterback.
Good stuff. So getting into the players coming out of high school, we've already talked about, Devin Campbell and Kelvin Banks, two of the top players in this 2022 class, but a lot of really good players. And, you've talked about every year, there's those true freshmen that just come right in and they belong, right? Because the point I made, the umbrella of my Devin Campbell and Kelvin Banks take on my last podcast was the best players in high school turn out to be the best players in college, and the best players in college turn out to be the best players in the NFL. So what is the one player from the 2022 recruiting class, not just at Texas, any school, do you think is going to be that player that steps right in and belongs? Like he's going to be one of the best players in college football potentially this year.
That's a great question. I'll avoid quarterback because I think I've spent too much time there recently. Although some freshman quarterbacks are going to make some plays. I keep an eye on Cade Klubnik at Clemson, by the way. That's one late in the season that I think
super talented. That spring game
he's
performance.
He's going to make some moves there. But Give me Luther Burden at Missouri, man. This is this kid looks like he's in the league right now. Big physical receiver who, as a recruit, was committed to Oklahoma, backs off, and then everyone thought, oh, this is going to be a Georgia, Alabama kind of kid. He's from St. Louis, man. He's stuck with Mizzou, an offense that is going to chuck the football all around. The SEC East feels pretty open right now. I mentioned, the how different Georgia's going to be. I still think it's their division to lose, certainly coming off of that national title team. And offensively, they'll be better. But I think they're going to give up some points. And I think a guy like Luther Burden could potentially, snatch a couple TDs against them right out of the gate. He is a big physical wide receiver who could be the number one guy for Missouri by mid-season. So I think he's the guy that, has 1,000-yard, 10 touchdown potential as a true freshman. I think there's a lot of great receivers last year. And I'd probably go Travis Hunter if he ended up at Florida State. But of course, he ended up at Jackson State. So I'll go Luther Burden, man. I think he is as complete a receiver as there was in the class last year. And he's going to a program that really needs him with the Missouri Tigers. So I think they'll score a lot of points, and he'll be a big part of that.
That's a really good answer. And a name I wasn't thinking about, but that makes so much sense. You're right. I mean, big kid, like you said, he looks like he's in the league. And Longhorn Nation, that's a player y'all might want to watch out for. Potentially, that's somebody that we could play before he leaves Missouri. All right, John Garcia, I'm going to get you out of here. One last question. In your opinion, outside of Nick Saban, and we'll say Kirby Smart because he's coming off of a national championship, who is the best head coach in college football right now?
Man, I love these. I love these questions, man. They really.
See, that's why I said, man, I'm like, you come on and you talk about these high school kids on every show all day, and I'm like, I just want to hear what John Garcia thinks about these college football teams and these college football games.
Yeah, I think it's like you said, it's easy to go to the top and let the rings kind of do the talking there. So I'd like to push against the grain for a lot of that. So I think outside of those no-brainers, like you said, Saban and Smart and Fisher and those guys, I mentioned him earlier. Give me Kyle Whittingham at Utah, man. This guy, it's like nobody talks about him. All they do is win 9 or 10 games. Last year, they beat Oregon twice in like a month. I don't know how much your audience has experience with playing ball and high-level stuff, but when you are a physical team and you kind of have this no-nonsense approach and you beat somebody once, the next time, generally, it doesn't go your way. It's just so hard to do it. And they beat Oregon bad twice in a very short amount of time to win the Pac-12 last year. I love Kyle Whittingham. I think he is quietly, one of the best coaches in all of football. He's developed great talent year in, year out. He's a guy who goes out and recruits all over the country. He's down in Florida recruiting guys to Utah consistently. He plucks kids from California, and it's never the most heralded kids, but it just seems like he develops them at such a high clip. And I'm such a fan of programs that do it without, the quote unquote 5 stars or the SI 99 recruits year in, year out. And Utah has quietly kind of always been that under Whittingham. So I think I couldn't be a bigger fan of his. So give me Utah and every year being an underdog and overachieving anyway. Like, I just talked about how they dominated the Pac-12 last year, and I'm already picking the new schools, Oregon and USC, to be better immediately. So I hope he sees it and gives me a shout on that because he deserves it. He's a big-time college football coach who, even as the game has adjusted, he's adjusted some on offense. And Cam Rising's a sneaky good quarterback, by the way. Utah is going to be really good again. But, man, he is always physical and defense first, and they always just make plays. And you look at the NFL draft and you watch a game on a Sunday, and you're like, oh, man, that guy's really good. And you Google him, and you're like, oh, he went to Utah? Like, I had no idea. So that was Devin Lloyd this year going in, the first round. So I love Kyle Whittingham. He's like my forever sleeper dark horse type coach. Love what he does at Utah. And once again, we won't talk about him, but they'll be pretty darn good at the end of the day.
Yeah, we won't talk about them until we see the results at the end of the season. Another great answer. This has been 30 minutes of just elite content. I promise you, I did not prep John for any of these questions. I just threw it at him. And of course, off the top of his head, he answered each one beautifully. John Garcia, director of football recruiting at Sports Illustrated. Once again, one of the best of the business, if not the best in the business. I'm truly blessed. Y'all are truly blessed that he's able to come on the show as much as he does. Longhorn Nation, as always, peace.